Hi there, I'm Maura, and for 10 years my family treated my career like a joke, until suddenly, they needed me to save everything they had left. It's strange, isn't it? How the people who dismiss you most loudly are often the ones who come crawling back the fastest. But what hurt more wasn't their mockery. It was realizing how long they had been planning my fall behind my back. Have you ever felt like your family only saw your worth when it benefited them? Tell me below. I'd love to hear your story. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It was that heavy blend of perfume and polished wood that only old money houses seem to master. I stepped through the arched doorway of my parents' estate in the Garden District, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor, unnoticed. My black dress, simple, respectful, felt like armor more than celebration. Around me, laughter bubbled, glasses clinked, polished smiles flashed like camera shutters. Nobody looked up. Clusters formed almost immediately, tight little circles around Travis and Clayton. Their latest business wins, their prestigious client lists, all recited like Sunday prayers. I drifted past the conversations like a ghost at my own funeral, my presence acknowledged only by the occasional polite nod. Chairs were drawn closer together, backs turned slightly tighter. No one made space for me. I gripped my clutch harder, feeling the first low hum of something unpleasant stirring inside. I found a quiet corner near the window, sipping water to cool the heat prickling at the back of my neck. When Vernon raised his glass for a toast, I turned to listen. "To our future," he declared, voice rich with pride. "To Travis, to Clayton, the next pillars of our family legacy." A ripple of cheers filled the room, glasses lifted high. I sipped my water, eyes steady, smile frozen. My name was never mentioned, not even in jest, not even as an afterthought. Later, when it was time for the traditional family photo, someone waved me over lazily, pointing to the very edge of the group. I squeezed into the frame, barely touching the shoulder of a cousin, who immediately shifted away. The flash went off. I blinked. That night, alone in my small rented apartment, I scrolled past the posted photo on social media. Cropped, tight, clean. I wasn't in it at all. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where I had stood. It wasn't the first omission, just the latest in a long string of birthdays celebrated without me, of college graduations attended by others, of achievements shrugged off with distracted smiles. Polite neglect had become the family's secret language when it came to me. I leaned back, letting the dim light of my kitchen cast long shadows across the floor. In the distance, I heard the faint echo of my own heartbeat, steady and cold. Tonight, something shifted. Something small but irreversible. I had spent years trying to mold myself into a shape that would fit among them, cutting away pieces until I barely recognized myself. But no matter how I tried, I would always be standing at the edge of the frame. Not anymore. I thought I had accepted my place. I was wrong. The house hummed with the muted energy of a party winding down. Plates were being cleared, a few half-hearted conversations clung to the corners, but most guests had already drifted away into the velvet Louisiana night. I was standing near the grand staircase, contemplating an early escape, when Vernon's voice called out behind me. "Maura, a moment?" He approached with a brandy glass in one hand, the other tucked into the pocket of his expensive slacks, posture loose like we were old friends sharing a secret. His smile was thin, polished. I knew that smile. It never meant anything good. "You always had a knack for organization," he said warmly, swirling the amber liquid. "Your little jobs made you sharp, no doubt. We could really use someone like you right now." I nodded cautiously, heart hammering a quiet warning. I wanted to believe him. God, part of me still wanted to belong somewhere in this crumbling dynasty. Old habits died slow deaths. He produced a slim manila folder from under his arm and offered it like an olive branch. Just a simple formality, a little assistance to help the family pull through these trying times. You know, one of us. I accepted the folder with careful fingers, the paper feeling heavier than it should have. A lump formed in my throat as I flipped it open under the golden light of the chandelier. It looked legitimate, corporate logos, clean formatting, impressive legal jargon. But something in me, something tired and wise, whispered caution. Take your time, Vernon said lightly, patting my shoulder in a fatherly way that made my skin crawl. We trust you, Maura. Trust, a word they'd weaponized more times than I cared to remember. That night, alone in the small guest room upstairs, I read the contract line by meticulous line, and there it was, tucked away in dense legalese near the end. A clause assigning full financial liability to the Sine, me, for all outstanding debts related to the merger. If anything went wrong, if the companies tanked as I suspected they might, it would all come crashing down on my name, on my life. I stared at the words until the letters blurred. For a brief moment, shame washed over me. Shame that I had almost believed them. That a few kind words, a glass of brandy, a polished smile could still reach some desperate corner of me that yearned for approval. I set the folder down on the nightstand and lay back against the cold pillow, eyes open, staring into the ceiling's vast nothingness. Somewhere beyond the thin walls, I could still hear the muffled sound of Travis's laugh, Darlene's clinking jewelry, the familiar symphony of a family celebrating victories that never included me. They didn't just forget me, I whispered into the dark. They planned this. Tomorrow, I would stop asking why. I would start asking how. The rain drummed against the windows in a steady, hollow rhythm, a fitting soundtrack to the kind of evening where silence presses too heavy against your chest. I sat on the couch, the merger contract still unopened on the coffee table in front of me, Vernon's voice echoing in my mind like a bad recording I couldn't erase. My phone buzzed once, then again. Messages. Names I hadn't seen flash across my screen in years. College acquaintances, an old neighbor, the girl from the coffee shop I used to visit every Thursday. All with bright, brittle greetings layered over something I couldn't quite name yet. It wasn't until I answered a call, out of old reflex more than desire, that it clicked. Hey, the voice said, too careful, too rehearsed. Just heard some things about your business, about how tough it must be for you right now. Thought you should know we're thinking of you. The call ended with awkward silence thicker than the Louisiana humidity. My coffee sat untouched on the counter as I replayed the conversation, pieces slotting together painfully clear. Darlene. It had her fingerprints all over it, that specific brand of weaponized concern, the kind that pretends to comfort while planting seeds of doubt. I could almost hear her voice now, soft and syrupy, telling distant relatives and church friends how worried she was for me. Poor Maura, lost in her tiny dream. My hands shook, not from anger, not yet, but from the sheer weight of recognition. How many times had she done this before? Subtle sabotage wrapped in motherly affection. I leaned back into the couch, the cushions swallowing me whole. Flashes of childhood flickered across my mind. Darlene congratulating Travis at his science fair with balloons and banners, while my spelling bee trophy sat forgotten on the kitchen counter. The time she said, smiling, that it was probably for the best I didn't make the varsity team. Less pressure that way. Little things, tiny cuts I learned to ignore until they bled together. And now, another slice. My phone buzzed again, a new message sliding into view. It was from Andrea, an old trusted friend. No preamble, just a screenshot. It showed a group chat, full of familiar names, cousins, family friends, laughing about how Maura's little company finally folded, speculating how soon I'd come crawling back. The source, Darlene, Travis, and others who had clapped me on the back just days ago. Something inside me, something fragile and soft, cracked. Not in the way it used to, when I would curl in on myself, trying to patch the breaks with excuses and forgiveness. This time, the crack widened, made room for something harder, colder. I read the message twice, then once more for good measure. Silent tears blurred the edges of the screen, but didn't fall. I wiped my eyes, breathing slow and deep until the ache settled into something almost clean. No more explaining, no more hoping. They wanted me to be small. Maybe it's time they see how big I can be. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and for a moment I stood frozen, watching the empty hallway stretch before me like a hollow artery. The office smelled of fresh coffee and printer ink. the ordinary rhythms of Silent Harbor still humming along as if nothing had cracked beneath the surface. I moved slowly through the corridors, trailing my fingers along the cool glass walls. Stacks of pending project files waited neatly on my desk, offering the illusion of normalcy I desperately needed. I threw myself into the work, combing through reports, answering emails, filling every space inside my mind with anything but family. Yet, unease lingered like static in the air. There were inconsistencies, nothing glaring, just tiny deviations. Figures that didn't match, client names spelled wrong, archived files shuffled out of order. Harmless mistakes on the surface, the kind that normally slipped by unnoticed. But I had built Silent Harbor with my bare hands, my mind sharpening against years of being overlooked. I knew when something was wrong. When Kira stopped by mid-afternoon with a nervous glance over her shoulder, I understood the shape the unease was taking. "I found traces," she said quietly, sliding into the chair across from me. "Someone's been digging around, secured folders, legal department stuff." I met her gaze, my stomach tightening. Only a few people had access. Fewer still knew what to look for. Later that night, after most of the office had emptied out, I sat alone, scrolling through server logs, reading access reports. One name surfaced again and again, like a stubborn stain. Travis. Of course it was him. A memory surfaced, unbidden. The early days of Silent Harbor, when I hadn't even trusted Kyra with the real books, hiding the true success behind dummy reports, terrified of the world finding a way to tear it down before it even stood tall. Now the threat came from blood thicker than water, wielded like a weapon against me. The next day, Kira slipped into my office, her face pale, her fingers trembling around her phone. She didn't speak, just handed it over. An email chain. Travis, forwarding internal strategic plans. Confidential client rescue protocols, sensitive restructuring data, straight to a rival consulting firm. It was messy, almost sloppy, like he believed no one would bother watching him. Proof. I stared at the screen, feeling the old betrayal bloom again, but sharper now. It wasn't personal weakness they attacked this time. It was the empire I had built from their discarded expectations. I handed the phone back calmly, feeling something colder, stronger settle into place inside my chest. The city lights flickered outside as the evening swallowed New Orleans in its humid breath. I stood by the window, the glass cool against my palms. They had picked a fight with the wrong person. If they wanted a war, they were about to see who they truly underestimated. The estate looked different by daylight, sharper, harsher, stripped of the cozy illusion the evening lights always tried to weave. I adjusted my jacket, smoothing a wrinkle that wasn't there, and pushed open the heavy oak doors to Vernon and Darlene's private library. They were waiting, faces wreathed in welcoming smiles that felt too shiny, too brittle. Clayton lounged near the fireplace, Travis beside him, a casual picture of generational success. "Family update," Vernon said lightly, lifting a crystal glass of something amber and expensive. "Just a little touch base." I nodded, sliding into a leather chair that seemed colder than the last time I had sat there. The conversation was easy at first, reminiscing about old holidays, the promise of bright futures, but gradually, almost imperceptibly, it shifted. Vernon and Darlene spoke glowingly about Travis's expanding legal firm, Clayton's new business ventures. Their words wove a tapestry of legacy, of pride, of future triumphs built on solid bloodlines. Except my name was never stitched into it. I listened, still and silent, as if hearing my own funeral plans delivered in soft, affectionate tones. Inside me, a slow tightening began. I remembered Vernon's voice years ago, calling me his brilliant little girl, promising me that one day, this house, this history, this family would be as much mine as anyone's. The promise crumbled like sand in my hand now. As the meeting broke into easy laughter, I rose quietly to retrieve another glass of water. In doing so, I passed Vernon's desk, cluttered for once with papers he had obviously reviewed and abandoned mid-thought. Something caught my eye. A draft will, half tucked under a stack of real estate contracts. I shouldn't have looked. I knew better. But betrayal had a gravity all its own. I lifted the page and scanned it quickly. There it was, in black and white. All assets, holdings, properties, and stakes. divided equally between Travis and Clayton. No mention of me. Not even a cursory acknowledgement. I didn't exist on the document that was supposed to carry forward the family name. The room buzzed behind me with the low murmur of voices, oblivious to the earthquake roaring through my chest. I replaced the will exactly where I had found it, smoothed the stack, straightened my spine, and then, with a smile so carefully constructed it felt like shattering glass inside my ribs, I returned to my seat and nodded along to the conversation, the very picture of quiet, agreeable daughterhood. They never noticed the difference. But I did. Because something broke inside me for the last time that afternoon. And this time, there would be no stitching it back together. Blood may carry your name. It does not guarantee your loyalty or my forgiveness. The skyline of New Orleans shimmered beyond the towering windows of Silent Harbor's headquarters, each tiny light in the city blinking against the darkness like stubborn, persistent stars. I stood with my palms pressed lightly to the cool glass, breathing in the weighted air of late evening, letting it settle into the marrow of my bones. It had taken me years to build this place. Every late night, every discarded slight, every silent vow stitched into the very structure I now fought to defend. And now they wanted to rip it from me, not through strength, but through deceit. I turned back toward my desk where the evidence lay scattered, ugly and undeniable. A folder filled with leaked meeting notes, whispers planted among clients, false alarms triggered with regulatory agencies. Travis and Clayton's fingerprints were everywhere, slick with the kind of calculated malice that didn't happen overnight. Anonymous emails, unsigned tips, each one engineered to make Silent Harbor look unstable, a sinking ship barely worth saving. My top clients had begun calling, cautious but worried, testing the waters. I could hear the hesitation in their voices, feel the fragile threads fraying. I sat down slowly, staring at the pattern emerging from the chaos, and as if the night hadn't done enough damage already, my legal counsel's call came through, grim and steady. "We've been served," she said without preamble. "A fabricated lawsuit, employment violations, financial misconduct. It's bogus, but it's messy. Funded," she paused, "funded by a shell corporation tied to Travis." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the bitterness roll through me before setting it aside like an old, broken thing. They weren't just attacking my pride anymore. They were aiming to bury my life's work under layers of manufactured scandal. But they forgot something vital. Silent Harbor wasn't a house of cards. It was a fortress built from years of being underestimated. I spent the next 48 hours setting my counterstrike into motion. Crisis PR specialists mobilized. Legal teams prepped countersuits with surgical precision. Assets and critical documents were moved into protective trusts, insulated beyond their reach. I worked silently, methodically, refusing to let fury cloud the meticulousness the moment demanded. Every move I made was deliberate, designed not just to defend, but to dismantle. Outside the glass walls, the city pulsed unaware beneath the misty rain. In here, under the soaring atrium of the headquarters I had carved out of years of dismissal, I stood alone, but unbroken. They had drawn their battle lines, and I, finally, had drawn mine. They wanted to break me. Instead, they built my resolve. The shift was subtle, but it cut deeper than outright hostility ever could. I stepped into Silent Harbor's atrium and felt it immediately. A thinning of smiles, conversations that paused too long when I passed. People I had known for years now glanced up, offered tight nods, and quickly busied themselves with anything but me. Kira met me by the elevator, her smile stretched tight across her face like a fragile band ready to snap. She clutched a folder to her chest, knuckles white against the manila edges. "Morning," she said, but her voice barely carried. Something inside me buckled. I had seen this before, in different forms, in different rooms. The slow retreat of people who once stood at your side when the cost of loyalty grew too steep. We walked in silence to my office. I didn't ask right away. Part of me wasn't ready to hear it. But Kira closed the door behind us, the latch clicking with a finality that made my skin tighten. "They approached me," she whispered, voice shaking. "Anonymous messages, emails, threats." I sat down heavily, absorbing the blow without flinching. I had expected retaliation. I hadn't expected them to go after her. They said, "If I don't walk away from you, they'll come after my family, my job, everything." The weight of it landed like a stone in my chest. I wanted to tell her it was fine, that she could leave, that I would understand. But the words tangled in my throat, strangled by the knowledge that this war wasn't just mine anymore. I nodded once and tried to smile. Later that afternoon, the second blow came harder. HR called me into a meeting under the guise of routine inquiries. The air in the room was thick with discomfort. Nobody looked directly at me as they slid a copy of an anonymous report across the table. Accusations against Kyra, embezzlement, theft of client funds. I scanned the fabricated allegations with a numb detachment, each lie another thread unraveling whatever hope I had left for fairness, for decency. It wasn't about Kyra. It was about isolating me. Destroy the foundation, and the structure collapses. I left the meeting without answering their questions. Some things didn't deserve acknowledgement. By the end of the day, Kyra was packing up her desk, head down, fingers trembling as she slid framed photos into a box. She wouldn't meet my eyes, and I didn't force her. I stood by the glass wall, watching her small figure walk across the parking lot alone, her silhouette blurred against the falling evening rain. Inside, the silence thickened, familiar, comforting almost. If standing alone was the price for standing free, so be it. The invitation came in a neatly worded email, signed off with love and nostalgia. Darlene wanted to have dinner, just the two of us. A chance, she wrote, for healing, for new beginnings. Against every instinct sharpened by years of silent war, I said yes. Maybe it was closure I craved more than peace. Maybe a part of me still needed to see if the rot ran as deep as I feared. Thanksgiving evening found me back at their estate, where the scent of roasting turkey filled the halls and laughter floated from distant rooms. The dining room had been set for two. Candlelight flickered against the heavy crystal glasses, the silverware gleaming with polished perfection. Darlene sat at the head of the table, her posture strangely frail, her smile worn thin. "I'm not well, Maura," she said softly, the words breaking slightly in the middle. "The doctors, they aren't optimistic." She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers, the skin cold, trembling. "I don't have much time left," she whispered, "and all I want is to see this family whole again, for your brothers, for your future children someday. Please, sweetheart, sign the papers, make it right." The moment was perfectly scripted. Tears gathered at the edges of her eyes, voice quivering at just the right pitch to strike an old familiar nerve. Guilt, obligation, love, weaponized into a leash. I sat frozen, fork poised halfway between the plate and my mouth, as decades of memories crashed against each other inside my skull. Every guilt trip disguised as care, every manipulation spun as maternal wisdom. The urge to flee clawed at my chest, but I stayed. I smiled. I finished my meal. I promised to think about it. Later that night, curled up on the worn armchair of my apartment, the city lights flickering far below, I scrolled mindlessly through social media to dull the ache. That's when I saw it. A photo, bright and casual, posted by a family friend. There was Darlene, radiant in a spa robe, laughing over champagne with her circle of lifelong companions. The timestamp? Hours after she had wept into her wineglass, begging me to make it right before it was too late. The breath left my body in one long, broken exhale. No cancer, no death sentence, just another performance. Another carefully crafted lie to pull me back into a life designed by someone else's hands. Slowly, without fanfare, I opened my laptop and found the draft email agreeing to the merger. I dragged it into the trash bin, deleted it, emptied the folder. No fireworks, no rage, just a cold, sharp certainty that hummed through every vein. They mistook my silence for consent. They will learn the cost of that mistake. Thanksgiving morning broke over New Orleans like a slow exhale, muted sunlight slipping through the mist that clung to the skyline. I sat at the head of the Silent Harbor boardroom table, a sharp contrast to the gathering that waited in stiff chairs along the glass wall. Vernon, Darlene, Travis, Clayton, all dressed in their best masks of warmth. their smiles polished to a high gloss that cracked at the edges if you looked too closely. A thick folder lay in the center of the table, the merger papers, their last desperate card. "We're so proud of you, Maura," Vernon said, his voice strained under the effort to sound casual. "All you've accomplished, it's truly inspiring." Darlene nodded quickly, her hands folded tightly on her lap. "This family, it's always been stronger together." For a moment, I simply looked at them, letting the silence stretch so thin it hummed in the air. I remembered every dismissive glance, every condescending comment, every invisible wound stitched beneath my skin. And now, when they had nothing left to leverage but hollow words, they needed me. It should have felt victorious. Instead, it just felt tired. I reached for the folder, sliding it closer with the tips of my fingers, and opened it briefly, enough to glance over the signatures already penned, the spaces left gaping, waiting for my name to seal their salvation. I closed it quietly. "No," I said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water, sending invisible ripples through the air. Vernon blinked, Darlene's lips parted soundlessly. Travis sat forward as if to argue, but I stood before they could find the words. "Thank you for the offer," I added, my voice calm, almost kind. I left the papers untouched on the table and walked out, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor, each step a final severance. The city greeted me with open arms, its streets still damp from the night's rain, the air cool against my face. I walked without purpose, without a destination, just breathing. Breathing in a life that, for the first time, belonged entirely to me. Flashes of old wounds surfaced as I moved, childhood dreams dismissed with a wave of the hand, birthdays celebrated in the shadows, achievements diminished to footnotes in someone else's story. But today, they were just that, flashes. They no longer anchored me. They no longer decided the weight I carried. By the time I reached my building, the mist had lifted and the rooftops of New Orleans stretched out beneath a sky tender with morning light. I climbed the stairs to my apartment's small balcony, the city sprawling endlessly in every direction. I leaned against the railing, feeling the hum of a world that had kept turning, even when I had been buried in someone else's expectations. Maybe that was the lesson after all. Forgiveness isn't always about letting them back in. Sometimes it's just about letting yourself go free. Looking back now, I realize that freedom doesn't always come wrapped in grand victories or sweeping applause. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, defiant choice to walk away, to refuse to shrink for the comfort of others. I learned that protecting your peace will cost you people, even ones you thought would love you unconditionally. And that's okay. In life, loyalty is earned, not owed. Blood may connect us, but it doesn't bind us to tolerate betrayal. If you're facing your own battles, remember, standing alone isn't a failure. It's a declaration of your worth. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to make a hard choice for your own peace? What did it teach you? Leave a comment below and share your story. I read every single one. If you felt something while watching this video, leave a 1-inch in the comments or tell me where you're from. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Let's keep growing, healing, and building a life worth living together.